We'll give it about one more minute and then we'll go ahead and get started. But the great thing is that this webinar is being recorded, so all participants or folks who've signed up will get a video recording of this webinar. Can everyone see my screen or see the presentation being shared? I know most of you are on mute, but feel free to unmute yourself. Great, thanks, Caroline. Awesome, and for those joining on the phone, don't worry about not being able to see the presentation. You will also get a copy of that as well. This webinar is really meant to be a conversation to help answer the questions that you have and give you the information that's most relevant to your specific needs. So let's go ahead and get started. So today we're going to start with introductions. I'm really excited to introduce our speaker today from Discover. She has a wealth of knowledge and experience that will be really valuable for you in this time, specifically when it comes to thinking about technology and how these disruptions play a part in talent acquisition for companies. We're going to jump into what's going on. What is the state of recruiting and hiring in light of COVID-19? What's going on campuses and what's going on specifically in your lives to make this as relevant as possible. We'll have some resources to help you find roles, as well as thinking about creating a plan and what resources you can use to do that. Virtual interview preparation, and finally, what to do after your interview. So first, I'd like to turn it over to the amazing Kim Holmes to give a brief introduction of herself and share a little bit about her experience. Go ahead, Kim. And you're on mute right now. Let me.
Thank you. I'm there now.
Okay, perfect.
I want to thank you for the opportunity to join everyone this afternoon. A great way to lead into the weekend. The opportunity to answer questions that folks might have. A little bit of background. As it states on the screen, I work for Discover Financial Services. I've been with the company a little over 20 years. I've spent most of my time at Discover in technology, focused in the application development area, supporting our card and bank businesses. Over the course of the last year, I have transitioned out of technology and into talent acquisition with a focus on making technology more diverse. In addition, one of the things I do is also support founders at Chicago's 1871 Tech Hub, which is how I've come to know and get the chance to work with Stella. So I'm looking forward to this afternoon's conversation, and I'm ready to support in any way I can.
Great, thank you, Kim. As you know, my name is Stella Ashaolu. I'm the founder and CEO of WeSolv, and in creating WeSolv, it was really focused on providing opportunities for candidates of all backgrounds to get access to meaningful careers. And in light of what's going on with COVID-19, that vision doesn't change. In fact, it's become even more amplified and magnified. This webinar is really it's the beginning of a number of resources that we want to share with students and candidates to help them navigate these times and ensure that hiring becomes more and more equitable. So First, we want to start with what's going on right now. What is the current state of hiring in light of COVID-19? Kim, I'd like to turn it over to you as far as Discover Financial. I know you can't speak for every company, but can you give us a little bit of a insight as to how Discover is approaching what's going on and what students should know?
One of the things that I'm really proud to say is that we are standing by internship offers that we've already made, right? So we actively recruit from campuses, both undergraduate and graduate students. And for every offer we've made, we're standing by those offers. But one of the things we're doing is understanding what the summer of 2020 internships look like. Normally, we offer a very robust on-campus experience. Our experiences are fully paid. We put people up for the summer. In light of what's going on, we now have to figure out, what does that experience look like? Do we have to try and modify that experience, have more of it virtual? What's that look like? So while we're trying to figure that out, anyone who's received an offer from us should know that that offer is going to be honored. In terms of what does recruiting for the next year's class look like, that's also under consideration, because normally we'd be on campus. We would be hosting events, looking to get to meet candidates face to face, and that's had to take a back seat in this new world. And so we're in the process of creating content that we can push out virtually, looking at more virtual events that we can do. So there's a lot of change, a lot of evolution in terms of how we engage with potential candidates that are going on. We will still be at the major diversity conferences this year that we've committed to. The ones that are still being held, we've already had some diversity events that have canceled, such as the National Society of Black Engineers, which we should be at as we speak, got canceled, but fortunately it was just postponed, and we'll be there in August. What we're looking at with other areas outside of campus is making sure that we are fully understanding what positions we should be hiring for, not unlike we usually do. So what's going on right now is a careful study of what our hiring needs are going to be for the remainder of 2020, and then opening positions as meet our hiring needs.
Great, great. Thanks, Kim. Generally speaking, when we look at the state of hiring among a number of WeSolv partners and companies that we're familiar with, a lot of companies are, some companies are conducting business as usual, in the sense saying, this is going to be over and we're still going to need to have hired folks for roles that they've projected out in the future. Giving you an example of that, Pinterest is one of our newest customers, and they are actually going to be hosting a few case challenges over the next year. And their goal is to continue to build a pipeline of diverse candidates, because they know that there are going to be roles that they're going to need to be filled. However, a lot of organizations don't know exactly what this COVID-19 pandemic is going to mean. And so they are taking their time as far as staffing up and making huge decisions when it comes to hiring. I say that because it's really important that you have an understanding of what companies are doing so you can plan accordingly. And we'll get a little bit more into that later and on in the conversation. One thing that I want everyone to be able to do is definitely, if you have a question, unmute yourself and ask, or feel free to throw it in the chat. We want to make this really interactive and helpful to your specific needs. As far as Career Center response and adjustments, we know that universities have gone remote. And so the folks that you're used to having just a few steps away are not available. And so Career Centers are having to adjust the way that they support and provide resources to you. I'd love to take this time for any folks to just, jump on or even write a message and say what specifically has changed within their career center. What adjustments have they seen? And if they have any thoughts on adjustments and things that they need in light of in light of career center reps going remote. Has anyone seen any major shifts or changes as far as the messaging that's been shared with you?
This is Caroline Meditz from Boston College, and I work on our employer engagement team. And where the message that we're getting from a lot of employers is that they're not quite sure, what they're doing yet. In terms of what we've changed, everything that we are doing is now virtual. So our planned coaching appointments, our student drop-in appointments that we hold for about 15 minutes with each coach day to day, and just given like the nature of BC, like we're a very sort of brick and mortar operation. Before this, we had a very limited virtual presence. You couldn't earn degrees online or anything like that. So we've really had to pivot and change how we're doing like day-to-day tasks. So I'd say that's just the biggest thing for us right now.
Thank you so much for that, Caroline. It's actually really great to get your perspective. As far as how students are receiving it, are you seeing anything specific that you didn't expect, or is it working in light of, the adjustments that we all have to make?
I feel like it's almost hard to tell at this point since it's been, I want to say, I have a colleague on the call as well, Motun. I think has it been a week since we've done most of our stuff virtual? I feel like I've lost all concept of time or so.
Hi, just to introduce myself really quickly, my name is Motun Bolamole. I'm a graduate assistant working at the Boston College Career Center. And yeah, I believe since the week of the 16th, March 16th. So
yeah.
I've also lost all concept of time. Is that but yeah, it's been, the turnaround has been quite fast. With moving things virtually.
Got it. Thank you.
And
so,
I guess.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think one thing that I would add to your point, Stella, about what needing to know what companies are doing to help plan is that I think we're also we're thinking about how we communicate to students that they might be going into a recession economy and what that means for them. So I think to your point about understanding what companies are doing, I think that is helpful for us as well.
Yes.
And how we understand how to communicate to students.
And that's great. And that's another point, just to share, we are connecting with our university partners and working with them and sharing information because our goal is the same of helping students. So we'll definitely be able to connect offline and share what we're learning from our company partners in hopes of helping you help your students. So now I wanted to just turn it over really quickly before we jump into the content is to, get from students what their biggest concerns are. And Motun and Caroline, feel free to chime in if you have any concerns specifically as it relates to how you support your students. But I want to make sure that Kim and I are able to address any concerns that students have. And for those who will be reviewing the recording, which is many, we hope that we'll be addressing the concerns you have as well. Anyone want to jump in with any concern they might have? April, Elena?
This is Kim. I'll jump in with some concerns that I've heard from other, this is the third or fourth virtual event I've done this week. And so lots of students are really eager to understand what this new normal looks like. And some of the questions that we've gotten on those other events are, what should I be doing right now while school is virtual and the semester may be over in some instances, and every institution is kind of developing their new schedule. What should I be doing to continue to ready myself for the world of work? And part of the advice
Kim, are you still there? Can everyone still hear Kim?
I can't actually. I think she cut out.
Okay, let's give her a second to see if she comes back. Kim, can you hear us? We can't hear you. All right, well, we can just move on, and once we're able to get Kim back, we can have her continue. I think she probably just signed out and is going to try to re-sign in. But this is definitely a great firsthand knowledge of some of the things that we'll be discussing or in this conversation. So I wanted to start with creating a plan. And I believe, Caroline, you mentioned this. In light of potentially entering the workforce during a recession, you know, you had a plan when you went to business school, what you wanted to do, what you wanted to get out of it. And even with that plan, you were still likely unsure and trying to figure things out. Well, now that the world is somewhat turned upside down when it comes to what to expect from a recruiting standpoint, we have to kind of think about reevaluating those plans. And while that might sound a little bit scary, it's nothing that hasn't been done before by students who entered the workforce in, 2000 and, 2008, or folks who were entering the workforce, right after 9/11. And as unhelpful as this might be to you right now, or as it might sound, you can talk to a lot of those folks and just see how they were able to, change the trajectory of their career and still land in a place, that they're happy with today. And so we want to talk about turning that plan A into a plan B. For instance, if you were interested in entering a field, function, or industry that is going to be hit hard by this recession and likely not recruiting, that doesn't mean that you are never going to have the opportunity to work in that area. What you have to be thinking about are, what are the experiences that would be relevant for that role, that function, or that industry once things change? And how do you now pivot your career search accordingly? So to give you an example of that, if you were really interested in going into, a new tech startup space, and it looks like that area, or potentially the company that you were looking at, might not have the bandwidth to continue scaling and bringing on folks in the organization. What type of enterprise company could you potentially go and work for, but still be getting the skills that would be necessary and valuable when at a later date you want to transition into a more technical role or in a more early stage startup? Additionally, if your goal was to go into a traditional role at a larger organization, in light of what's going on, you might notice and find different problems and things that you feel like you can solve. You may have never considered entrepreneurship as a potential course or route that you could have taken. However, we know that during recessions and during downtimes, some of the most life-changing and innovative companies were created. And so don't shy away from the idea that this could potentially be an opportunity for you to jump into something new. And while we know that comes with a number of risks, it's something that to be considered. But I think the most important takeaway here is about creating a plan and then creating another plan and making sure you have a number of options. Kim, I see you're back. I wanted to let you finish your thought. You cut out around talking about some of the concerns that candidates have.
Right.
Specifically, how do they ready themselves for this new workplace?
My apologies for losing connectivity. What I was saying is that one of the things that I've been encouraging folks is now is the time to double down in terms of understanding the companies, the industries that you're most interested in. Everyone is going through a state of change, and the skills, the types of work that are going to be available after we get on the other side of this pandemic will not look the same as they were even 6 weeks ago. And so now's the time for candidates to understand what the companies, the industries that they're interested in are likely to be looking for on the other side of this situation. And so once you take a look at those companies, what are likely, those fields, what are likely to be the kinds of skills they're looking for? Are we looking for, if I pick financial services, are we likely to look for folks with compliance backgrounds given the stimulus package that was just passed this afternoon that has a number of safeguards in it and requirements for financial services institutions? Perhaps we'll need more folks with those kinds of skills. Technology, now that we've learned that we can actually do more remote work, what might that look for engineers that are skilled in voice over IP or other internet leaning technologies? As we look at supply chain, no other industry is being hit as hard as supply chain right now, and in terms of how we get goods and services delivered and how we make sure that people have what they need all the time. So how do we prepare ourselves if we're going into a job market looking at what our new world looks like? How do we refine our skills, our knowledge, such that we're prepared to go into that? And so picking up on, as I rejoined what Stella was saying, refining your plan so that if plan A said that you were going to do a certain thing, I'd say now's the time to be reflective and look not so much at jobs, but as skills. Look at the skills that you have. Look at the skills you want to develop and the things how you want to deploy them, and look for the industries that are likely to need that combination of skills you have and those you want to pick up as you continue your job search.
Really, really great point, Kim. Thank you for that. And so we wanted to also share, what are the resources that you can use to find companies that are still hiring? And a lot of this might seem like common sense, but also I think there are some ideas that you might not have been considering. And so I'm sure Caroline and Motun can definitely speak to, the Career Center office and, your on-campus job boards. Companies that are still hiring will be posting those, and that continues to be a source for you to look for roles. You just might have to widen the net a little bit. And we know that the number of roles will probably be less than they would have been otherwise, but it's still a source that you can look to engage as far as finding roles. Diversity organizations are a really important source for companies to connect with candidates. So National Black MBA Association, Forte Foundation, Pro Hispanica, these are all organizations that are connecting directly with companies to provide members with opportunities and roles. And while they, as well as the career center service, career centers and other job boards will have less volume, it's another place to look to see companies that not only are interested in still hiring, but specifically place diversity as a priority and want to connect with candidates of all backgrounds. And then the other place is direct on the company career sites. Kim, you can speak a little bit about this as far as what your career sites are communicating in light of COVID-19, and the fact that while there might not be as many roles as would have been otherwise, can you speak to, what is currently the state of your company career site?
So one of the things we've done on our career website is to explicitly explain what COVID-19, the impact of it on our hiring process. Right now, our process has modified to do a lot of our outreach virtually. We're doing virtual interviews. And it used to be that if you were not located in the vicinity of one of our offices, we would fly you to our headquarters for an interview. At this point, we are interviewing virtually. We're working out virtual onboarding and delivery and finding ways to deliver equipment to new hires. And a lot of these things are spelled out on our career site, as well as the opportunities that are there. Discover, I'll just put a little pitch in, has just recently refreshed our career site, and so making it a little easier to search out roles. We've got testimonials from employees there, so you can get a little bit of the look and feel of the company and the kinds of opportunities we have. But we have done a nice job of making the impact of the pandemic really explicit on our hiring process so that candidates know what it will look like for them.
Great, thanks, Kim. Another resource that I want to throw out there is the WeSolv job database, which is something new that we've recently put together in light of what's going on. Once on-campus recruiting was shut down and companies realized that they weren't going to be able to attend events, WeSolv has received an influx of companies reaching out in attempts to connect with the WeSolv network. And the WeSolv model essentially was connecting companies to candidates remotely and virtually. And so they realized that they need to have these types of touch points, these types of networks to continue to source quality talent. And so we not only put out a call to new partners and new companies, but have received a number of job roles and organizations that are still hiring, and have put together a database that you can leverage in your search. The database is continuing to grow day by day, and we've made this available for all WeSolvers. And we'll be sharing all of these resources that we've compiled together, as well as other resources and talking points from this conversation after this webinar. The other thing that I think is really important to think about is what companies are changing their hiring plans in light of COVID-19 and a response to the uncertainty about the future. We've put together a resource of companies that have announced hiring freezes or hiring slows, as well as travel restrictions, and the time period, so you know whether or not a in-person interview is even in the horizon, or if a virtual interview is the only place or option that you have, or if it's a company that you really shouldn't be spending time on because they are reducing headcount or freezing hiring. And then when it comes to finding roles or companies that are hiring, I think it's really important to not forget the creative and foundational ideas of recruiting. It's unfortunate, but we live in a world where a lot of folks get jobs based on relationships. And now more than ever, as an MBA student, it's a time for you to lean into the fact that you're a student and a candidate, and reach out to alumni, people in your university network or in groups and organizations you belong to, whether it be organizations like the Consortium or Forte Foundation, and try to get those informational interviews, those conversations going that will provide insight or access to companies that are hiring and hopefully help you find roles.
And if I can jump in here, one of the things that I would say is make sure that you are leveraging LinkedIn, because that's where recruiters are living. That's where hiring managers are living. And doing simple LinkedIn searches on your university and finding alumni that way can be beneficial. I've gotten a number of folks who have kind of crept in to my direct messages these days on LinkedIn who went to the same grad school that I did, just trying to understand how did I make the transition from a graduate degree into the role I currently have? How can they make that transition? Oh, and by the way, what kind of roles do you think I'd be suited for from our institution? So I think that being able to meet on that platform and start those informal conversations is a great way to get to understand what that company culture is like and how to make that transition from student to full-time employee.
Yes, thank you for that, Kim. That is a really great point. And I think something to reiterate is how Kim mentioned, connecting on a shared or a common, trade or organization, asking questions about, her career or industry or company specific, and then leading into, well, what are the types of roles that fit that at your organization? Another thing that you might want to think about is just following the people who are at the companies and in the roles that are relevant, because these people are posting things about roles that come open. Even if you're not directly reaching out, if they're not in your network, you're not going to see what's going on at the state of their organization or what they're thinking about, what's top of mind, because all of that extra information gives you kind of a leg up in this search.
And I would say in that same way, follow the companies that you're interested in on LinkedIn.
Yes, definitely.
Because that's where you're going to get the latest scoop and understand what breakthroughs they're having, what are some of the challenges, what are their successes, as well as their hiring practices. And I think that prepares you when you're ready to go in and hopefully put in that application for consideration. The better prepared you are in your understanding of the company and where they sit, what they do, how they make money, the better you're positioned for success in that interview.
Yes, definitely. Thank you, Kim. So now let's jump into virtual interview preparation. Spoiler alert. The preparation that you need to do for virtual interviews is not much different from the preparation that you need to do in general. While there's things that are tweaked and changed, the moral and the really important thing to take away from the story is that you need to be prepared. So let's talk about before the interview. Before you sit down to take an interview, whether it's virtual or in person, it's really important that you understand the organization. You understand the industry of that company. You understand who is interviewing you, and you understand your experiences and how they transition. A lot of that is all of the same preparation that you need to do for any in-person interview as well. But I think it's really important that folks don't forget that. Sometimes because it's not in person, people think that they might be able to get away with, being less prepared, and that's actually the opposite. What to wear. Now, this is something that I think is you would think it's self-explanatory, but it's not. Come to the virtual interview as you would to the in-person interview. And I think it's really important to think about matching the culture and the industry of the company that you're looking to interview with. So if you're interviewing with a tech company out in San Francisco, you might not need to wear a three-piece suit or, be dressed in professional attire. And you want to try to mimic and match the type of industry and culture that that company has. Kim, can you speak to the type of attire that is appropriate for interviews at a company like Discover?
I would say that this is uncharted territory for us in some ways, because as a Fortune 100 financial services company, we, within the last couple of years, have moved to a very casual stance. But I would encourage you that I would share that most hiring managers are still looking for you putting your best foot forward. So maybe it's not a tie, but it's still a jacket and dress shirt for gentlemen, and a nice blouse and blazer for ladies until you've secured the job. And then it's jeans and very cash, sneakers, leggings. It's pretty much what you're wearing around the house today, probably. But I'd say you'd want to put your best foot forward. You can never go wrong wearing a jacket to an interview.
Definitely.
A jacket and a nice top, and not jeans.
Yep, and I want to give the caveat of matching the culture of that organization, but the interview culture, not the culture once you've already landed the job. So,
right.
Make sure to be as polished and as professional as you would be in person. Make sure your hair's done. Even though you're at home, make sure you're neat and you're kempt and put together. The other thing I want to speak to is making sure you don't just dress from the waist up. That's something that a lot of folks think that is a benefit of a virtual interview. You never know if you're going to have to get up, and you definitely don't want to have to reach over, or something happens, someone knocks on the door, there's an emergency, and you have to stand up and you're wearing your boxers. So dress from head to toe. I think you could get away with not putting on shoes, but make sure you're dressed from head to toe in professional wear. The next thing we want to jump into is technology. Make sure to update the most recent software of whatever technology tool the company has you using. If possible, go into that software, test it out beforehand, make sure you know how to use all of the controls, make sure it's compatible with your computer, make sure that it works. I can't tell you how many company representatives as well as candidates have told us horror stories about their virtual interviews and technology going wrong. And just from anyone who's a technology user, that there's always an opportunity for something to not work, and anything that you can do to mitigate technology issues, you definitely should do. You want to make sure that you test the technology as far as your camera and the lighting that you'll be using. And so you can check the lighting at 12 o'clock, but if your interview is at 3:30 or 4 o'clock, remember the lighting might be different in your place. And so you want to check the lighting as close to the time as your interview. And if necessary, use additional tools such as a lamp or other types of lighting to make the lighting work. Another really great thing to think about, if you're doing an interview with a tool like Zoom, there's a new feature that allows you to change the background and to also optimize your appearance, almost like a filter. Check out those tools and see if those things work, if those things work to optimize and create a professional experience during the interview. Second, setting the stage. Where you choose to have your interview is really important. You need a quiet place, and so in light of social distancing and folks being quarantined, it's a little bit more difficult. It's easier said than done, but finding a quiet place where you can take this interview uninterrupted is really important. Companies will be a little bit more lenient or understanding, specifically in this time, but you don't even want those distractions. Make sure the background behind you is appropriate for the interview. So if you're taking the interview in your bedroom and you have, some really interesting posters on the wall, you might want to think about that when choosing the stage of your interview. And just in case, I definitely think it's really important to preempt a lot of the issues that might happen. So basically, think about everything that could go wrong. You're going to want to have set the stage with a glass of water just in case you get dry mouth in the middle of a question. You're going to want to have a pen and paper handy just in case you need to write some things down. So it's really important that you kind of think about all the things that can go wrong and mitigate those before it happens. Do you have anything to add there, Kim, on any of those topics?
I would say, and make sure you are distraction free. So we talked about people distractions, but turn off the stereo in the background that you've got going, turn off the television, turn off your text messages. Make sure that if you happen to be using a computer where you've got other applications open, close down all the applications on your computer other than the browser you're going to be using so that you don't have notifications popping up. You're not distracted from the electronics around you.
Yes, very, very good points. And that brings us to the next slide. What to expect and what to do during the interview. And so the law of technology, I'm sure most of you are familiar with it, is that technology will malfunction. It is, you've been in the meeting where the sound isn't working. We talked about prepping, and you can do all of those tests, but you never know what can happen. Just how Kim was, kicked out of the call, that's something that you can't really prepare for. But what you can do is preempt the possibilities of those things happening. On your interview, speak to your interviewer and say, really happy to meet and connect. Just in case we get disconnected, is there a number that I should call you on if anything happens? Try to think of things that you could do to mitigate any issues that might disrupt your interview. Body language is something that people think are not as aware of during virtual interviews. It's really important because you can't walk in and give your interviewer a firm handshake, that you convey the type of body language that shows what they're looking for. An air of confidence, sit up straight, don't be fumbling with your shirt or something. You can use your hands, but try to take a look at what you look like in your camera before the interview and find the body language that best communicates you and your professionalism during the virtual interview. Another thing that's really important, and that's a little bit more difficult to do during virtual interviews, is creating a connection and connecting with your interviewer. During this call, while you're not in person, you still have the opportunity to connect with them, to understand who they are, and share a little bit about yourself. You want to make sure that you are able to come across. And we know it could be a little bit awkward during the virtual interview. So make sure that you have their picture on your front screen. If you have two cameras, if you have two screens, you don't want to put them on the side screen because you'll be looking to the side and they'll see you as not looking directly at them. You want to find all of the opportunities to connect directly with your interviewer, just as you would in an in-person interview. And then use this opportunity to flip the script. As Kim mentioned, they are figuring out how they're going to change their hiring and interview process to account for no in-person interviews. You're not going to have the opportunity to walk the halls and to see the environment of the organization. So what can you do to better understand the culture? What can you do to better understand the type of organization and the environment that you would be working in once this situation has changed and you're in person or able to be on campus? And then finally, I wanted to share some tricks and things that you can do during the interview. So one thing that I wanted to make sure that I share is don't try to write down your answers to questions. It is very obvious if you're reading during a virtual interview. And just like any other interview, you'll want to have prepared and practice answering the questions that you expect to get during the conversation. But you don't want to memorize it because if anything changes, it really throws you off and makes you look unprepared as opposed to the more polished or prepared look that you were going for. But one thing that you can do is if there are certain things that you want to make sure to get across during your interview, create Post-its and you can put those around your computer monitor and only in really big writing, and those can serve as reminders. If you want to make sure that you speak to a certain experience, you can put it on a Post-it, and when that right question comes up, you'll have that reminder. Another trick that you can do during the interview is thinking about coming across really naturally. And so pretending that rather than the person on your monitor is the person you're talking with, speak directly to your camera, that little dot. And so you don't want to dial in on it so that you look cross-eyed, but kind of pretend that the person is right there and use your peripheral to still get there, to still see them on your monitor, but try to look directly at the camera so you can have that better connection. Kim, do you have any other tips and tricks that you think are helpful to candidates as they interview with recruiters and hiring managers virtually?
I'd say that you really want to use the fact that you're in your own environment to be comfortably professional. While you still want to maintain good body language and sit up straight, I think it's a little easier to project confidence and a conversational approach sitting in your own home. So use your environment to work for you to kind of break the ice and to be able to be more comfortable and confident in carrying on that conversation with the interviewer. It's like you're having a remote dinner party in some ways, where you're going to do this interview and you can relax just a smidge because you're not sitting across the table from someone where you have to be ramrod stiff or the kinds of things that you would normally do in an in-person interview. Relax just a skosh and let your environment work for you to loosen you up and give yourself that chance to shine.
Yep. Thanks, Kim. Thanks. Another thing I wanted to share is be transparent with your interviewer. So, for instance, if you're having a conversation and you're asking questions and you want to take notes, let your interviewer know. Say, I just want to take notes on what you're saying to make sure to document this. That way, they'll understand what you're doing and they won't have any question. Or if you bring your resume to the table and to the interview, that's a great idea. Let them know. Say, I have my resume here. I hope you have a copy, or I sent you a copy as well, so that they know if you're looking down at a piece of paper that you're looking at your resume as opposed to a script or a cheat sheet. Being as transparent as possible definitely goes a long way and helps to kind of form more of that connection and engagement in the conversation. Do you have any questions here? I know we've been giving a lot of content here, but I want to make sure that we're able to answer any questions about any of the topics that we've discussed so far. And so after your virtual interview, what to do? I think it's really important for you to take the time immediately after your interview to take notes. If there was anything of importance that your interviewer said, or anything that you said that you want to be able to reference in a follow-up, it's really important to jot all of that stuff down while it's fresh. You might think, okay, I'm going to send a follow-up or a thank you, later today or tomorrow, but it'll never be as clear and as fresh as immediately after your interview. So take some time to take notes and jot things down. Always follow up. Just like any in-person interview, you want to follow up and thank your interviewer. During the interview, you should have asked questions about next steps. So use that as an opportunity to reference those next steps. And then finally, be consistent. And I say consistent instead of being persistent, in the sense that if you said you were going to follow up, a week after the interview, or your interviewer said that they were going to follow up and they don't, take the time to send out a message. Their timelines are shifting. A lot of pieces are moving. You want to stay top of mind, but you also don't want to inundate your interviewer with questions or follow-up as far as next steps. Once you've determined when you should be hearing back from your interviewer, if you don't hear back, wait a little bit, but reach out and stay consistent in reaching out with them. That'll go a long way. It's really important that they know that you're interested, invested in the organization, and that this is your top choice for a role. Because there's a lot of things that go into consideration about candidates, and it's not always, who we think is the best person for the job. Sometimes companies are looking at who has shown that they are most interested in this role, who has shown that they're most committed to our company, who has shown that this is something that they really want to be a part of. Because a lot of times you can train and people can grow into the right fit for the organization. Kim, do you have anything to add as far as after virtual interviews?
I'd say in that, in those follow-ups, use that time to further, what's the word I'm looking for? Further kind of refine your message. I'm following up with you, and you can do that by saying, not just that you're following up, but you might have seen a news story about the organization. You might have learned some new facts, and you can say, congratulations on your being named as a top place to work in Chicago. This is just another reason why I would love to work with you. If you see that they've gotten a new patent or that they've hooked a new big client deal, use that as a way to reinforce to the interviewer, to the hiring manager, that you really are staying up to date with what's happening with that company, or how your skills can be put to use in a new circumstance that you're following up on. So don't stop doing homework on that organization after the interviewer until you know that you are no longer in consideration for that role. Yes. As long as you still are under consideration, stay on your toes, stay engaged with that organization, and let them know through this follow-up process that you still are paying attention to who they are in the marketplace and what they're doing.
Great, great point. Thank you for that, Kim. Well, now I'd like to open it up for questions. I don't know if folks have any questions on the line, but definitely we'd love to hear what questions you have. Kim is definitely a wealth of knowledge and has a lot of experience both interviewing and working in a large organization in their talent acquisition area. So I'd love to hear what questions candidates have.
This is Caroline Meditz again. Thank you both so much. This was really informative, and I think probably the most in-depth information I've received about virtual interviewing. So I really appreciate the details you touched on. I'm curious for both of you, what feedback or thoughts have you received from recruiters engaging in virtual interviewing, and also any feedback you've received from students as far as like patterns of thought that people have shared or like common takeaways, especially as it might pertain to things that are like difficult or maybe negative on their side?
Yeah, definitely. So the biggest thing that I can speak to about virtual interviews from the company partners and companies that we've connected with is that they're somewhat awkward, and it's really hard for the candidates to shine through their real personality. And that's understandable. And coming from WeSolv's perspective, we understand that behavioral interviews are not the best way to ascertain a candidate's qualifications or their fit within an organization. But unfortunately, we can't completely erase that part of the process and rebuild the recruiting process. And so that's why WeSolv exists, so that candidates can get real experience, get more comfortable and familiar with an organization or an industry, and be able to have talking points and things that go beyond just, biased things like how they appear in the behavioral interview or having similarities to their interviewer. So in that same vein, I think it's really important for candidates to try to understand as much as possible about the organization, about the role, about the company, competitors, products, like that, so they can lean on those in those conversations, and then really focus on, being relaxed and natural, even though it's an unnatural experience of talking to a computer screen instead of a real person. Kim,
right. I would say trying to be conversational is one of the hard parts, right? And having that personal connection. The other thing I would say, looking at our interview process, and as I mentioned earlier, we're moving into this because of this circumstance, is we do panel interviews, but the panel is one person at a time, right? So you'll have a series of interviewers. When you're doing those in person, when we bring you on campus, you at least get a break. You get to there may be a gap of time from person to person, and so you can kind of refresh yourself a little bit. When you're as we've seen from working at home, when you're on the phone for an extended amount of time, or you might have back-to-back calls, that can be draining, and it gets challenging to not let that drain show when you're on a screen where you're not necessarily looking your best anyway, and you don't have the empathy necessarily that more easily comes when you're talking with someone face to face. So trying to find ways to maintain that fresh, energetic, building that rapport and that empathy is something that both recruiters and candidates will have to work on as we do more and more virtual interviews.
Great, thank you both. That's very helpful.
It's the human part that's the hardest part.
Definitely.
Right. Yeah, and it's encouraging to hear that preparation for this type of thing is similar in a lot of ways to an in-person interview, which I guess is expected, but the idea that students should really still be doing their research and everything, and that really still plays into this. I think that's a message that we're really trying to drive home. Like, just because you're not sitting in front of someone, if anything, that means you ought to prepare like more in a way, because they can't read your emotions the same way and interact with you in the same way. So it's good to know that like we're like on the same page about that.
Absolutely.
Another thing that I want to make sure that folks think about is trying to be as prepared before the interview by asking questions as far as what they should expect. This is really going to impact a lot of different types of interviewing styles. And so for those folks who are interviewing for strategy and consulting roles where you're used to doing cases and writing right there in front of them and watching them, are they going to want you to do a case? Are you going to be expected to have your own piece of paper and writing on that? I think as a previous consultant who went through interviews, it's nice to not have them looking over your shoulder as you're writing, but maybe they have a software tool where they want you to use the whiteboard tool as you're going through it. And you should be prepared and know exactly what you're going to be getting into during that interview as best as you can, if you can respect
and I think it's right.
Sorry.
And I think it's fair for the candidate to ask those questions perhaps even before the recruiter shares it, right? Couching it in, I want to make sure I can put my best foot forward. Can you share with me what this experience is going to be like, right? And give the recruiter that little nudge that, yeah, you want to make sure that you're putting your best foot forward, and as a reminder to them that, because at some point, the recruiters are this is going to start to become natural for them, and you don't want to be on the short end of the stick of where it's become routine for them, and they start forgetting details about what this needs to look like. So the candidate should come in prepared to ask for, just as Stella outlined, prepared to ask for what the circumstances are going to be like, how they can be prepared, so that you can put your best foot forward.
Great, thank you.
Awesome. Any other questions? Well, thank you everyone for taking some time to join this webinar. We hope this was helpful. For all those folks who will be listening to this after the fact, definitely feel free to respond to the email with any additional questions, and we'll make sure that the WeSolv team gets you answers. Like I said in the beginning, we are working to provide resources and help you through this time, and that will continue to evolve. So we look forward to hearing any thoughts, any questions, any concerns that you might have, and ways that we can better support and partner with you. And definitely we'll be sharing this to our university partners. So for all of you folks like Caroline and Motun, definitely feel free to reach out, and we'll be working to help you better support your students as well. Thank you so much, Kim, for your time. We really appreciate it. You added such a lot of color and valuable insight. Really appreciate your time. Thanks again.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Awesome.
Thank you, everyone. This was great.
Awesome.
Have a good weekend, everyone. Be well.
Thank you. You too.
Enjoy. Be safe.
Thank you.